This episode is brought to you by Amazon. Sometimes the most painful part of getting sick is the getting better part. Waiting on hold for an appointment, sitting in crowded waiting rooms, standing in line at the pharmacy, that's painful. Amazon One Medical and Amazon Pharmacy remove those painful parts of getting better with things like 24/7 virtual visits and prescriptions delivered to your door. Thanks to Amazon Pharmacy and Amazon One Medical, healthcare just got less painful.
Hey guys, before we jump into this week's episode, I just want to say a huge thank you. This week on the podcast, we hit a milestone of 5,000 downloads. Let's be honest, we couldn't have done that without you. So thank you so much for joining in each week to the conversation. When I started this podcast, I had no clue who would listen or join in, but I'm so grateful for the people I've met along the way and excited for the conversations to come. So thank you so much. And let's jump in to today's conversation. Hey, I'm Greer, host of the Unfinished Idea podcast, mom to 2 boys and 2 dogs, and raising a child with additional needs. Our day-to-day experience isn't being talked about in everyday life. So let's start the conversation. Whether you're a parent, a friend, a teacher, or a neighbor, everyone is welcome to join us over a cup of coffee as we help bring awareness and better understanding about neurodiversity and families who are raising children with additional needs. We're here to share the joys, the struggles, and the differences, as well as learn and grow and feel seen and heard by how we interact with each other and the world. Welcome! Today we are talking with Clare, one of the co-founders of the SenLife App. We talk about her own experiences in raising neurodivergent kids, as well as why she created this app to help parents stay organized amongst the meetings, appointments, and everything else we need to help our kids get what they need. She shares a lot about her own experiences as she's now raising teenage boys and the joys, struggles, and differences she has experienced. So let's jump into our conversation today. Okay, Claire, so you are raising 2 boys who are on the spectrum of being neurodiverse. What has been your experience advocating for them over the last 10 years?
So my experience with my eldest son was that initially he was identified as having some challenges way back in preschool, where they tried to put various measures in place, reward systems, discipline, etc., and nothing seemed to be going well. And at the time, I just didn't really understand why, or there was no real discussion going around, in terms of what they actually thought the sort of issues were. And I think it's worth noting that this is 10 years ago. So the conversation's really different now. There's thankfully, a lot of information out there about neurodivergence, and there wasn't really so much at the time. So it wasn't in my mind at all at that point. My journey really from there was that when my son started school, he was again sort of flagged as having some challenges just generally within the classroom, doing what the other children were doing, circle time, taking turns, all that sort of stuff. And actually I was recommended to go to a GP. But at the time, again, didn't have any of the language, didn't really actually understand why I was going to the GP other than the school had recommended, for me to do that. So, the early days of trying to advocate for him were extremely difficult because I didn't know how, and I didn't have the language to use to actually discuss what was happening with him other than as a parent to say, I'm finding this really difficult. This is a huge challenge. I don't understand. And, really was getting nowhere without knowing the correct terminology and how to really discuss what was happening with him at home. So that was the kind of early stages. And Oscar actually wasn't diagnosed with having ADHD till he was 12. So in that period, really, my ability to advocate for him was zero, to be perfectly honest, because without the knowledge, the tools, the know-how, it was just a case of trying to firefight what was happening right in front of me. But we were never really in a position to be ahead of that. And I found it extremely difficult talking to medical professionals, talking to school, because without a diagnosis, or really on my part, I didn't really know what was happening with him. You're not coming from a place of strength really, or knowledge on any level. So that was my sort of early experience.
And through kind of the last 10 years, a lot of language has changed, a lot of conversations have been had, or at least ongoing. Have you seen a difference in how advocating for your child back then to now? Is it easier, I guess? Is it easier, do you think? Or
I can only speak from my personal scenario, was that I had to educate myself in terms of understanding what was happening with him and what his particular challenges were. I think that there is a huge amount in the public domain now of information and awareness, but I wouldn't necessarily say that the challenge is less in terms of trying to advocate for his needs. And now that we have a diagnosis and I have a really good understanding of him as a child and what his challenges are, I can articulate myself when I'm talking to people about Oscar, but I still find it incredibly frustrating because it isn't a given. He has an ADHD diagnosis. That isn't a given that he now has certain things in place. I still have to really challenge and really advocate for his particular needs. You know, in a naive way, I suppose I thought a diagnosis would mean this whole chain of events would start and he would be in a process that would then support him, which wasn't the case at all. It was very much a case of me, but I think it wasn't transparent to me that I was still in the same situation of saying, okay, with school, for example, okay, those things don't work for Oscar because this is how he needs his environment to be so that he can learn. And I think that we're still quite a way off getting to a point where, okay, you can say, okay, my son's had a diagnosis. This is how he presents. And that's that. These are the measures we put in place. I would say we're not there, but I feel confident now and I have the right language and I'm able to really advocate for his needs in a way that I wish I could have very early on. But it all comes down to your own personal knowledge, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree that I've learned a lot over the last year and grateful for people who have done the work to help me learn quicker, if that makes sense. But yeah, I've had to do my own research, a lot. So what kind of rhythms do you have in your life that might be different to other families?
So I think the key, we had some quite sort of major turning points, I think, in the parenting journey with trying to look at what wasn't working for us as a family unit. And it all came really hand in hand with really getting to know Oscar and his needs and being really, really drilling down on the things that were really he was not able to do and couldn't comfortably do, and taking away all the social norms, all the cultural pressures around you and just thinking, okay, what works for us as a family? And I think it's so normal to me now. I probably almost don't notice, but thinking about it, we don't have family meal times. It's just not something that really features in terms of the traditional sense of an expectation for my sons to sit at the table at a set time, to eat a set meal. What we tend to do now is I still cook and lay the table, but it really depends on what's happening that week, that day, if it's been a difficult day at school or what's happening in their world. They will, at times, one of my sons will eat standing up at the breakfast bar and another child will potentially be at the table but might not want to talk. Sometimes my eldest son takes his meal on a tray up to his bedroom because he really has expended all of his energy at school and just can't deal with the situation. So I think that's probably been the biggest shift, which sounds silly because it's a small thing. But the battles that happened around these expectations of us coming together as a family. And I guess for me as a parent, feeling like it was hardwired into me that you have to have a family meal because if you don't have that connection, then how are you going to be a family? And actually starting to peel back the layers of that and think, but why? Why do we need to do that? Because I have two sons who are hyperactive and find sitting still, excruciating, and they do it to the absolute best of their ability at school. And hats off to them. You know, they're amazing because they try so hard. And then they come home and I'm saying, right, you have to sit still. You have to eat this meal. It was only standing back and thinking, why am I doing this? It's not family time. It's actually creating an enormous amount of stress. And I used to feel that stress rising as I was cooking a meal. And thank goodness I had the sense to think, this is our home. We can create our own routines, and it's nobody else's business what we do at home. So that we have a much more relaxed view around routine and things that we should be doing. And I base a lot of my decisions around what's happening in their lives. Have they had exams that week? Is one of my sons not sleeping well? And it's much more about their needs than it is about the need to stick to a routine. So that has massively changed things. And the irony is they do often sit and eat with me because the invitation's there, but there's no pressure. And I think that is really the key. I wouldn't put them in a situation, for example, if we were invited to a large family lunch and there was going to be all different generations, there's an expectation that it's going to be indoors, it will be noisy, there'll be no movement, and they'll just be eating and a lot of adults then talking at the end. I wouldn't entertain even taking them to that. And we just don't do those things. It is getting much easier because of my eldest son's 14 now. So he is able to manage himself, but I wouldn't really put them through that unless it was an extreme sort of circumstance. So I think the biggest sort of shift for us is really knowing what their limitations are and not expecting them to have to sit through those excruciating scenarios for something that's really, it's completely unnecessary. So we do have a much more harmonious household now in terms of what we expect of them.
Yeah. I know a few weeks ago we talked about meal times, and I actually, after our conversation, thought about that. Like, what is this benefiting my family? Because I would find meal times probably the most stressful part of the day. And so I sat down, but like my husband and I sat down and we were like, no, it's not worth it. I mean, we have two younger boys, so we still kind of sit at the table. But for our son who has ADHD, he has the complete freedom to get up. So he'll like eat a bite and then he'll get up and like go play with stickers on the, on this like big sliding door we have. And then he'll come back and eat a few more bites. And, for a while we would fight that. It's like, no, you have to sit and stay till you're finished. But now we're like, well, no, that's like, it's just brought so much more peace and joy. And like you say, like, they're still at the table, like, the invitation's there. And so they still sit at the table, but it's not like sit there for 10 minutes and eat your meal. It's, it might be 30 minutes that we're at the table because everyone gets up and down. And yeah, so I appreciate you sharing that and just the freedom that we've experienced as a family already.
It's the pressure we put on ourselves, and that comes from the outside. It isn't, I didn't have the overwhelming need for them to sit at the table. It's something that is born into you in terms of traditions and what you should be doing. And I think I mainly try and analyze anything in my mind that I feel I should be doing. I will question it and think, okay, is this beneficial to us? And actually, what's nice is by taking those pressures away, I can see the times where we are sociable with each other are never really the ones that you would necessarily think. My eldest son, his school's quite far away, so we're in the car together, and it's really obvious. Those are our best conversations. Side by side in the car, we're listening to music. He's not having to make eye contact and he's relaxed. So we have great conversations in the car, and I really value them. I would never have that conversation with him at the table. So it's not like you lose that. It's just, it happens organically and they are comfortable. And that's really nice. We have little routines. I watch, my eldest son loves Man United. So we watch the Man United games together on a Sunday together. And again, we're not looking at each other. He's relaxed. He's doing something that he loves, but he will chat away. And it's lovely. And it's really freeing to know that you're not losing anything by looking at their needs. You're gaining, because the other thing that we have gained from really trying to mold our family around their needs is that it builds trust, and it builds that sense of, you get me, you understand me. You're not someone who's just enforcing arbitrary rules, which, is a lot of the time how they feel at school. Like, I don't understand this rule. Why is this a rule? At home, they shouldn't, in my mind, they shouldn't feel that way. You should be able to say, well, okay, well, if it's something that doesn't work, let's talk about it, rather than this is how it is and this is how it's going to be. And so I've definitely noticed a shift in them feeling like, okay, if something really feels beyond me, I know I can say, and it's a discussion rather than, an outright just, that's the rule and that's that. So it definitely has helped us with that sort of dialogue between each other.
Moms, tired of overthinking every decision around what's best for your kids? Stop. Get Smarty Pants vitamins and worry about one less thing. Smarty Pants Kids Multi and Omegas support kids' overall health with 16 daily nutrients, including vitamin C for immune support and D3 for bone health. That's 45% more nutrients than the leading kids' multi-gummy brand. Seems like a no-brainer, right? Get Smarty Pants on Amazon today.
I like that idea. Yeah, kind of the shoulder to shoulder, no kind of the eye contact. That's hard for anyone, but like especially children, with ADHD. And like you say, our son, we have a big sliding glass door, and we have these like window stickers, and he will create the most magnificent scene and just talk like, and it's like he's processing his day kind of. And so I love to hear, I might not be like necessarily part of the conversation, but I can overhear his conversation with his kind of characters and just hear about his day. It's just really sweet to hear that and know that I'm still being part of what he's saying, and part of, he knows I'm in the room. He knows I'm, sometimes I'll ask him a question or something, but to him, he doesn't have to look at me. He's not being drilled. He's getting to use his creativity. And it's really, really sweet to see a 5-year-old do that. So you work for an organization called SenLife. Can you explain what is an SenLife and why did it start?
I was project managing, working for a large company. So we're going back 3 years now. And I had this kind of gnawing feeling all the time that we had weathered the storm a little with the boys, in terms of I felt that we were at a really solid place with, getting good plans in place at school, and we were kind of finding our feet at home. But it had felt like the most, monumental battle to get there. And I couldn't help but feel that it never really needed to be that hard. And I think I just had these ideas going around in my head of, okay, how can I now use the knowledge I've got to pass on to parents at the beginning of that journey? Because if I'd had a person guiding me, I don't think I would have found it, just so overwhelming. So I was kind of throwing some ideas around in my head when I happened to get introduced to the co-founders. So there's 3 of us, and Joe and Patrice, I got introduced to via a friend who were also thinking in this area of, okay, how can we make a difference here? So they have a nephew who is autistic, and they offer their family help with care and, support them. And we kind of came together at a moment where we were like, okay, we want to do something. What can we do? And the idea was, how can we use technology to help us, give parents that empowerment with advocating for support for their children? So the idea was really the daily diary, which kind of sounds quite simple, but actually what I'd identified was throughout my journey with my sons, I was always being asked at every turn to prove what I was saying. So it wasn't enough for me to say, oh, my son does this. And it was, okay, well, I need evidence. How often does he do that? Why does he do that? In what setting does he do that? What does he do at school? And all these questions would come, and I think, I don't know how to answer that because I can't remember now. We started very simply from a perspective of, how can we capture a child's behaviour in a diary format really easily, so that actually when a parent does get asked that question, here we go. We've got this lovely diary online, really easy to use, really easy to share. And that's literally where we started from that perspective. That's kind of grown, which is wonderful, into more than a diary. So parents capture their child's sort of daily diary. But actually what the app then does is takes that data and creates reports based on the scenario that they want to use it for. So if they're going to see a GP, if they want a plan in place at school, if they want some help at home, the data will then be put together in an insight report, which gives them specifics around that setting. So the idea is you are armed as a parent with evidence, because you'll always need it to say, okay, this is what my child's doing. These are the challenges. These are the things that they do well. These are all the triggers, and it's all that information that then gives the clinician, school teacher, the information they need to then build a plan. So it's that awful moment when your mind goes completely blank, you're under pressure, you might only have at the most 10 minutes to make an impact, to actually get through that next gateway to the next rung of the ladder so that you can try and get that support. In 10 minutes, you need to be pretty good at getting that information across. So that's where SenLife started. And that's where, that's where our focus is at the moment.
I will say a feature that I really enjoy. So I've been using it because we would have a binder of stuff that I would need to have with me. I would just take it with me. But now I've been putting that binder onto the app. And I had a meeting, kind of an impromptu meeting with the Synco. And it was impromptu, so I didn't have the binder. But because I had the app, I went through and could say, oh, these are all the things that over the summer were triggers, or, whatever, like it generated. And it was, there was two things I really liked. One, it was so quick and it generated it very quickly. And two, it made me look like I was really on top of it, even though I wasn't. But the Synco was just like, oh, wow, you're, oh, you can track that. That's so great. Like it was really, she was impressed as well and surprised. So I have shared information with her about it, but it's just easy to use. And I think it's great that there's something that it's on my phone, ready whenever I need it, easy to use.
The whole point of it is that it's created by parents that know what this feels like. And that to me is the greatest thing about creating something, is that it's all about making parents' lives easier. So the app itself is super easy to use. It's just pressing a button. You can speak, you can type. It takes a minute each day. And actually, that is something you can do for a minute each day. But the output, the feedback that we've had from the parents in our trial group has been amazing, because you feel prepared. And because you feel prepared, you're front-footed in the room.
Mm-hmm.
You're able to speak with knowledge, with clarity, and say, this is my situation. And you're not stumbling across sentences, because I think we all know, unfortunately, a lot of the time the answer is no before it's yes. And I don't feel that you're pushing at an open door to get support. I think it's the opposite. I think you need to prove yourself before you can start to talk about the sorts of support that you might be able to get for your child. And a lot of that is how you carry yourself. It's how you approach it. The apps, it absolutely is a diary, but it's so much more than that. It's, okay, you've got your diary, but also the data is presented in a way that it's very easy for you to access and talk about. And you're speaking the right language. You're speaking the SEN language, rather than I would start a conversation 10 years ago around, Oscar's had a meltdown. Well, it doesn't mean anything, but actually with the data, I'm able to say, actually, Oscar was completely, his sensory system was completely overloaded by a situation and he wasn't able to regulate himself. It's all these catchphrases and language that you're then able to articulate yourself so much better, which I think parents really appreciate. We had a lovely testimonial from a parent the other day who was able to get their child extra time in exams and use of technology based on using the diary to show all of the issues that they were having. So it's definitely given parents and armed them with the information that they need.
Yeah, it's definitely helped us. And it's made by parents who have gone through this, so they know. So it's not just a parent, it's a parent who's been through this. You can see all the functions of that. And the fact that you can either type it or put a voice. I mean, I spend probably less than a minute a day just with a quick voice note in it and then carry on. I know I've tracked what I needed to track and I know it will be there when I need it. So it's a great tool.
That's great.
My last question that I'd like to ask is, what is something you want the world to know about neurodivergent people?
So I think that, again, based only on my personal experience, is that I have felt my sons are really misunderstood a lot of the time. And I find that so frustrating. I find that it's been easy to categorize them as being disruptful, disobedient, lazy. There's been, over the years, some really unkind and unhelpful sort of labels put on them. I don't think that people have any understanding of what that does to a child's self-esteem and how they feel about themselves, which really absolutely breaks my heart, because I think that it has a huge impact on their confidence. And I think it stores up problems for later in life if you're not able to address them. I read a statistic, I think it was around, by the time a neurodivergent child is 12, they will have had something in the region of 20,000 more negative comments or feedback than a neurotypical child. I can really believe that. And there needs to be a greater understanding of why a child is doing a certain thing, and I think I've gotten quite a bit of support from Oscar's school around the fact that if Oscar is doing something disruptive in a lesson, it will almost certainly have a reason attached to it. He isn't being disruptful for the sake of being disruptful. Something is happening. Something has dysregulated him. And if actually someone takes the time to say to him, is everything okay? What do you need? What's happening? He will articulate that. And he will let someone know that there's an issue. And I think a lot of the time it's frustrating because actually what then happens is he's disciplined and the negativity starts. And I think that it becomes such a downward spiral. Once a child is in that negative space, it's very hard to start pulling them back. My sons both react to positive reinforcement, like on an astonishing level. I have seen such brilliant results from just that constant positivity. When they do something well, I just jump on it very quickly. And once they're in a positive mindset, they're actually amazing at keeping it going. Once the negativity sort of sets in, then it is much harder to pull it back. I think it's that misunderstanding piece. It's about, underneath that, I have two exceptionally gifted children who are really smart, really funny, and have such talent, but they don't necessarily have talent in the mainstream school environment. That doesn't mean to say they shouldn't be given the positives for the things that they can do well. That is, for me, where I would love to see the biggest change, looking at a child as a whole and being able to see all of them rather than the parts of them that tick the boxes from an educational perspective. I think it's really damaging for a child's confidence to feel that they're always failing to make the mark. And the education system as it is now just doesn't take neurodivergence into the scope. And it's still very much an ableist system, which doesn't really give all children the chance to shine and excel in what they do.
Yeah, I'd heard that similar idea of I hadn't heard a number, but just that neurodivergent children take on more negative or criticism, not because but they receive more negative criticism or feedback. The example someone used was it's like a snowball, just kind of that it builds and builds and builds over time. And how in reality, like you said, when a child, particularly a neurodivergent child, is having a sensory overload moment or whatever, there's something attached to it. It's not just them wanting attention or them wanting, not getting something they wanted, but there's something attached to it. And if the world kind of unpacked that, it would be very different, I think, if that makes sense.
There's been some sort of key phrases that have stuck in my mind, and I keep them in my mind, is if he can, he will. And I very much feel like that about my sons. If they can do it, they will do it. They're not obstinate just for the sake of it. There's nearly always a logical reason that you can pinpoint. That's really important to understand rather than just to write them off. And I try and keep that in my mind. It's frustrating and it's really hard. I'm not saying it isn't, but there's got to be a better way than the way that we currently look at children, which is sort of one size fits all.
Well, thank you very much, Claire, for joining me and having this great conversation. Is there anything else that you'd like to say?
I think it's been really lovely talking to you. And, we would absolutely love parents to get on board with SenLife just because we want to build a really great community of people. And I believe that our app can really help parents quickly. I don't think it's something that takes time. My biggest piece of advice to parents that are starting this journey is to arm yourself with information and get the knowledge that you need about your own child, and you will navigate those systems so much easier. It does get easier, and the more knowledge you have about your child, the better.
I would agree. Knowledge is power. So thank you very much.
Have a great day.
An idea to finish on. Meltdown. Emotional or energetic outburst when overwhelmed. Meltdowns can occur after sensory or emotional overload or an overwhelming experience. It can be expressed externally or internally. You might show some signs of distress before a meltdown. Point to ponder on. What triggers a meltdown for you? What do you need to do afterwards to help yourself? Hey, if you found this episode helpful or think a friend might find it helpful, why not send them a link and let them know what you think they might enjoy about it? Thanks so much for joining into the conversation, and see you next week. We want to give a special thank you to Amy Peters, who's the creator of the Neuro Cards, the pack that we use here on the podcast. If you'd like to get your own set, follow the show notes for the right link.